This video is brought to you by Card Kingdom, and while supplies last, if you mention Saffron Olive in your order notes, we'll hook you up with a free Saffron Olive sticker with any Card Kingdom order. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Brewer's Minute. So today we got a topic that isn't the most brewy topic ever, but I think it's a really important topic, and that is Bannings and Pioneer. And we're coming at this from two angles. First off, we just had our first of our Every Monday Being Our announcements, 3 cards getting banned in Pioneer. So we're going to talk about the cards that were just banned and why they were banned, but more importantly moving forward, I'm going to lay out my Pioneer banning watch list. And just so it's super clear going into this, I'm not saying these cards are getting banned, I'm not calling for these cards to get banned, but Pioneer's in kind of a weird place. I feel like Wizards, when they announced the format, they were thinking it was going to be Magic Online only for the next 3 months or so, and then paper Pioneer would start with the Players Tours and GPs in 2020, but the clock has really moved forward with Nerd Rage game events, SCG invitationals embracing Pioneer immediately. So the format has moved into paper quickly, and Wizards, with their every week ban announcement, was kind of thinking, okay, we're going to put this on Magic Online. Players can kind of beta test it. We'll not put really anything on the ban list to begin with outside of the fetch lands, and then we'll just ban stuff as we go along, leading up until 2020, the real launch in paper with the Players Tours and GPs, and then we'll get in a normal BNR announcement. But with Pioneer moving into paper so quickly, there's actually some risk buying into paper decks. And even though I'm not saying the cards are going to get banned or calling for them to get banned, I think as you're buying Pioneer decks, it's worth considering, is there a chance that this is going to get banned? What cards might be high on Wizards' radar for next Monday, or the Monday after that, or the Monday after that? Because even though Pioneer decks are not modern prices, they're still not cheap, so you don't want to put out $300 or $400 on a deck only to have it get hit by a banning and never really be able to use it. So I think that's why it's important to talk about this banning watch list. And I will again say, not calling for bannings, and this is my own personal watch list. And I have reasons I think the way I do, but this is just my take on stuff that Wizards is probably thinking about moving forward with the ban list. So anyway, that's our plan for today. Pioneer bannings and a Pioneer banning watch list. So before we jump into it, a super quick reminder, if you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be so sweet of you if you could take a second, click the subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's jump into the Pioneer banned list, starting with the cards that just got banned on Monday. So you probably know fetch lands banned from the start of the format, but nothing else was. And I feel like our first list of bannings, including 3 cards, pretty logical. Number 1, Felidar Guardian. This was a card that a lot of people would have assumed would be banned right from the start of the format based on its Splinter Twin-like combo potential, and Wizards didn't ban it right away. However, we saw Copycat be a really huge part and post really high win percentages in the Pioneer format. If you look back to Frontier, a kind of Pioneer-like community-driven format, Copycat has been up to 50% of some of the top 8s of those tournaments that they've held recently. So I feel like Copycat, getting rid of it, makes sense long term. There's no reason to let it live longer. If there was any card that you could argue should have been banned at the start of the format along with fetch lands, it was probably Felidar Guardian, because I think everyone knew that it was probably going to have to go eventually. It is just not the kind of strategy you really want to exist. The combo is too easy. It demands too specific of answers. We can argue whether Saheeli or Felidar should have been banned. Personally, I like Felidar Guardian because it works with Panharmonicon, but I do think Wizards probably made the right choice, because sooner or later, over the next 5 years or 10 years of Pioneer, there's a decent chance something else will come along, break Felidar Guardian, so we might as well just get rid of it now. So banning 1 hit the top deck in the Pioneer format. Banning 2 is maybe a little bit more surprising and wasn't really on my radar initially, but we have seen, thanks to some new cards, Mono Green Devotion just rise to the top of Pioneer super quickly, and one of the biggest pieces of that puzzle was Ley Line of Abundance. So Wizards banned Ley Line of Abundance to keep the Pioneer Devotion deck from its super explosive starts, and I feel like this was a good choice. I think that with the SCG Invitational coming up more hype for the format, this deck was going to be a problem. It was basically the Tron of Pioneer, and having played against it many times, it is not that unreasonable for this deck to be casting something like Nyssa on turn 2 or turn 3 into Ulamog on like turn 3 or turn 4. It just gets out of control way too quickly. Yes, you can kill the mana dorks to answer it, but again, if you don't have an Anger of the Gods, or you're playing a deck that isn't overloaded with cheap removal, it's too easy to get run over. So I think that this was another good banning choice, and again, similar to Felidar Guardian in the Copycat combo, Mono Green Devotion was kind of the other pillar of the format. If you look at the top tier of Pioneer over the first few weeks of existence, Copycat combo, Mono Green Devotion, certainly right on that list, in the very top, along with a couple of other decks. The third banning, a little bit more surprising, Oath of Nyssa. And this is a card that I feel like hits on Copycat. Even though Copycat's dead now, it also hits on Devotion, and you can just argue that it's too good in an absolute sense. 1 mana that does so many things. It's essentially very similar to a Greed Ponder, but it's also adding a Devotion to the battlefield, or maybe an enchantment to your graveyard when you Legend Rule it to be able to cast your Emrakul for cheaper, or turn on Delirium, or maybe it's a Legend in your graveyard for Kethis combo. So it just does so much. And in a lot of ways, being a legendary enchantment is a big upside compared to being an actual ponder. So even though this, I guess, most specifically hits on the Devotion deck, I feel like this is just a card that's probably too good by rate. And I'm fine to see it go. I wasn't necessarily expecting to see it go, but we knew that Felidar Guardian combo, Green Devotion were at the top of the list, so losing 2 pieces from Green Devotion, I think that that's perfectly fine. So far, I'm pretty happy with the bannings, and if you really look into them, you can argue that Wizards, in the first BNR announcement, hit 2 of the top 3 decks in the format. The other deck I would throw in there is It Phoenix? That is the other, like, top tier deck that avoided bannings, and that kind of transitions us into our banning watch list. So these are cards that I think are worth keeping in mind moving forward, as you are investing in Pioneer decks. I'm not saying, again, that they will be bad, but just these are cards that I think have a higher probability of being banned than the other stuff in the format. So to start off our watch list, I think at the very, very top, we have Treasure Cruise. And really, the Delve cards in general, I think if you ban Treasure Cruise, you probably just ban Dig Through Time as well. Treasure Cruise is a card that has been broken in every non-standard format. It's banned in Legacy and in Modern. It's restricted in Vintage. It is a card that is very easy to get to 1 mana, draw 3, turn it into Ancestral Recall. Yes, Pioneer doesn't have fetch lands, which does power it down, but you can argue there's already a deck that found a way to break it, which is It Phoenix? Is It Phoenix is the one top tier deck, I would say, that dodged bannings, and while it's maybe not the perfect home for Treasure Cruise, it does a very good job of taking advantage of it. So we already have perhaps the best deck in the format being a Treasure Cruise deck. And this is 2 weeks into the format. People are going to figure out ways to take advantage of the card drawing power of Treasure Cruise. So I think that Treasure Cruise, and as I said before, if you ban Treasure Cruise, you might as well just ban Dig Through Time and get rid of it. It's close enough that people can play it as a replacement. So I feel like these are the top tier of the banning watch list. I would not be at all surprised if before we get to the big paper event in the start of 2020, that the Delve cards get banned from the format. So I would be very nervous, I guess, about investing in a deck that is dependent on Treasure Cruise. And I think the biggest example is It Phoenix? I'm not sure if It Phoenix would remain a deck without Treasure Cruise. You don't have as many cheap cantrips, you don't have Metamorphose like you do in Modern. So I feel like if Treasure Cruise gets banned, It Phoenix is at least going to take a very big hit. So we'll have to wait and see, but at the top of my watch list, Treasure Cruise, and then Dig Through Time just kind of goes along for the ride with Treasure Cruise. Also in the top tier of my watch list for Pioneer bannings is Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time, I think the justification for banning Once Upon a Time is we just banned Oath of Nyssa, and you can make an argument that Once Upon a Time does a lot of what Oath of Nyssa does, but maybe even better. You can cast it for free. It digs 5 cards deep instead of 3. Yes, you lose the synergies of like having a legend in your graveyard or a permanent for Nykthos or whatever. But I think if you're going to ban Oath of Nyssa, I think a lot of the same consistency adding problems that you get from Oath of Nyssa are there with Once Upon a Time, and it's already really jumping up in the metagame. It's among the top 10 most played spells in the format. It's showing up across archetypes, and it's a card that if you were in the colors and you're playing a decent amount of creatures and a decent amount of lands, you just kind of put it in your deck no matter what. So I feel like once upon a time, Wizards might be more hesitant to ban it because it's a newer card. They're still selling Throne of Eldraine packs, but I certainly feel it is on the watch list, especially after watching Oath of Nyssa get banned. If Oath of Nyssa was too much, it's hard for me to see how sooner or later Wizards won't come to the conclusion that Once Upon a Time is a little bit too good as well. So that is my top tier. Treasure Cruise, Dig Through Time, Once Upon a Time. Those are cards that I would be careful of in Pioneer. Then we have kind of the second tier of my banning watch list, and these are cards, I think that they're less likely to get banned next Monday or whatever, but I think depending on how the format develops or shakes out, they could move up into that top tier and be banned as well before we get to 2020. So here in this tier, number one, Smugglers Copter. Smugglers Copter, the problem with it isn't necessarily that it's too good. There are better answers in Pioneer. Fatal Pushes, Abrades, etc. People could deal with a Smugglers Copter, but because it's colorless, it's just so easy to put it in any deck. And in our database of Pioneer decks on Goldfish, it's up to like 22% of the meta, and almost always is a 4 of in those decks. So if Smuggler's Copter just keeps increasing and increasing and gets up to 30% of the meta or 35% of the meta, which is certainly not impossible, then I think you have an argument of banning it just because it takes away from the diversity of the metagame. If you're playing a deck that can crew it, you just play Smuggler's Copter because it's so pushed on rate. Next on our list, we have Nexus of Fate, which Nexus has developed into a legit second tier deck already in Pioneer, and I think the argument for banning Nexus of Fate is not so much that it's too good, maybe it's too good, but more that it is just really disliked and miserable to play against, and I don't think that with the hype for Pioneer, people really want Nexus to be a top tier deck in the format. So I think if there's an argument for banning Nexus, it's that it's just not fun, and it takes a long time to win, and the loops are there, and you have all the pieces of Wilderness Reclamations, and it's just a not fun experience to sit across from at the table. So we'll see if that plays into Wizards' reasoning. Again, this is the second tier of the ban list, so I'm not expecting it to be banned next Monday or anything like that, but it's something to keep an eye on. If Nexus develops into the best deck or even a top tier deck in the format, I could see it being banned just because it takes so long to win and people really dislike it. Next up, we have Oko Thief of Crowns, and if you're talking bannings, you're just kind of remiss to not mention Oko in basically any format. Here, Oko is obviously not as good in Pioneer as it is in Standard, where it's just kind of like breaking everything, but a turn 2 Oko is still really legitimate, and we have Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystics and Gilded Geese. There's a lot of ways to get a turn 2 Oko down, and Sultai Super Friends built around Oko is one of the top tier decks in the format that dodge bannings, so we'll have to see, but it's definitely something on the radar, and similar to Nexus of Fate, the mood of the community has kind of turned against Oko, and it's just widely disliked and a meme at this point. So maybe that pushes Wizards a little bit more towards banning it, just because they know they're not going to really take any gruff from people if they end up banning Oko, because it's just so hated by the community. And then last on our tier 2 list is Nykthos Shrine of Nyx, and this is basically on the list because I'm not sure if Wizards got it right with the Ley Line of Abundance banning or not. There is a risk that Nykthos was the actual broken card in the deck. Yes, banning Ley Line does slow Nykthos down and slows down Mono Green Devotion, so I think it was a good place to start, but I think there's still a chance that Nykthos ends up just being too much for the format, even without Ley Line of Abundance. So while I don't think it's in danger of being banned in the near future, keep an eye to see how good decks like Mono Green Devotion are with the most recent ban list. If they are still in the very top tier of the format post-banning, we might get to the point where Wizards is just like, all right, we got to get rid of Nykthos. That's the real problem in the format. So that's the tier 2 of the ban list. One other thing I wanted to mention on the way out the door, Aetherworks Marvel is a card that has basically moved off my banning watch list, or at least down to like tier 3 where it's almost not worth mentioning. Heading into Pioneer, Marvel was at the very top of my list along with Felidar Guardian based on what it did to Standard, but it's seeming like a couple of weeks into the format now, Marvel's just not that big of a threat. We've seen a couple of 5-0s, a few people playing it here and there, but it is certainly not a top tier deck in the format. It's certainly not breaking the format. So I'm moving Aetherworks Marvel from in my tier 1 of my watch list heading into Pioneer to maybe off the watch list altogether, or at least at the very lowest tier of the watch list. I think if there's any worry about Marvel, We'll see what happens once Ley Line of Abundance is gone. Maybe the reason people weren't playing Marvel is the best way to go over the top of people was just to play Green Devotion. And maybe with Ley Line of Abundance gone, people will explore Aetherworks Marvel more. On the other hand, it might be that we have good enough hate cards that Aetherworks Marvel just isn't that good in Pioneer. We get Pithing Needles and Sorceress Spyglasses and Abrades and cheap artifact destruction. And there is a big cost. In Standard, Servant of the Conduit, that's just a legit card. In Pioneer, Servant of the Conduit, Rogue Refiner, some of those random energy cards, they're not as good as they were in Standard because the format has so many more cards, there's so many more powerful options in the format that unlike in Standard where Servant of the Conduit is just an on-curve 2-drop anyway that also happens to work with Aetherworks Marvel, there is a cost to playing these semi-good energy creatures to turn on Aetherworks Marvel. So I'm moving Aetherworks Marvel down on my list for sure, and I'm not really that concerned about it. Things could obviously change in the format. It could still end up being a card that needs to be banned, but for right now, I think it is way far behind the Delve cards and Once Upon a Time, and also behind our second tier that we're talking about with Nexuses and Smugglers Copters and Nykthos and Okos. So Marvel's kind of just off the radar at this point, but still, we'll wait and see how the format develops. Anyway, that's all I had for today. That is what happened this week with the Pioneer Ban and Restricted announcement, and also what I'm looking at moving forward. So, one more reiteration, not saying any of the cards that we talked about on the watch list will be bad. Just keep them in mind as you're investing in your Pioneer decks. Maybe don't spend your entire Pioneer budget on Izzet Phoenix, because there is a risk that Treasure Cruise gets banned and the deck gets killed. Same with some of the other cards we talked about in Nexus deck, for example, a deck that's really dependent on Smugglers Copter. So just keep these cards in mind as you're making your decisions about what decks to buy in the format. Things will change once we get to January, and once Pioneer moves onto the regular BNR announcement along with all the other formats. But for right now, with a BNR every week, and based on what we saw with this first BNR, where Felidar expected, something for Green Devotion expected, Oath of Nyssa maybe not as expected, Wizards, it seems like, is sending a message perhaps that they're going to be aggressive with these bannings, with these weekly announcements. I mean, just having a weekly BNR sends the message that Wizards is open to changing things at any time. So keep that in mind, especially in paper, before you go all in on these decks. There is a risk, and there is a higher risk than any other format right now with the weekly announcements. So either, I don't know, avoid those cards, or at least just think twice before investing too heavily in cards that might be on the watch list for future bannings. So anyway, that's been our Brewers Minute for this week. Bannings at Pioneer. Let me know what you think. What is your Pioneer banning watch list? Is there anything else we should be keeping an eye on, being a little wary of before spending our hard-earned money on a deck that's built around it? Let me know in the comments. Also, just let me know how you like Pioneer. I've been loving it, but I want to hear your opinion as well. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.